For Victims and Villains, my name is Josh, and today we are talking about the anime movie Dan to Dan. This is The Evil Eye. Dan to Dan, The Evil Eye picks up right where this first season left off, as this is kind of the bridge or the intro into the anime's second season, formulated in a movie. We'll talk about it in a few minutes. But basically, our heroes face off against the new threat, the Evil Eye. If there is ever a fandom that we have had requested to be covered more, to make more podcasts, more conversations, and content around, it is anime. Now, once upon a time, we did have an anime podcast here at Victims and Villains on our network called Animind, and it covered a lot of just really tentpole pictures, including Astro Boy, Ghost in the Shell, Fruits Basket, and more. I probably messed up that last one. I'm still fairly new to this genre, but this is kind of our first step into trying to create more content, more reviews, and more conversations around the world of anime. Anime was something that I kind of fell in love with over the last 6 months. I have just been devouring a lot of Crunchyroll. So if you do have any recommendations, drop them in the comments below. But we're here to talk about The Evil Eye. Dan to Dan is a rather newer anime, and I feel like I don't hear quite enough people talking about it the way that I feel like they should, which is surprising me because not only is it streaming, the first season streaming on Crunchyroll, but you can also watch it on Netflix and Hulu. So this is one of the most easiest accessible animes now available, and the first season is absolutely fantastic. It is one of the best newer animes that I have come in contact with. Again, still a novice when it comes to this genre and this fandom, but I really loved the humor and the heart and the vibrancy in the colors that existed in that first season. And with that said, I will also say that this kind of feels like this more mature progression of the storyline. Like I said, this picks up exactly where the first season ended. But this movie is dark, like way darker than I was anticipating on it being. And I guess that's a great kind of segue to kind of throw this out there as a trigger warning. This film does deal a lot with suicide, both from a visual standpoint and also thematically, kind of essentially woven throughout the course of almost 2/3 of this movie. Now, what I will say is that seeing this movie makes me more excited for the tone that they're going to set for the rest of the second season, because essentially what this movie is it's basically kind of Frankensteined together, if you will. It's not a traditional movie. It doesn't actually bridge the gap between season 1 and season 2, but rather it features a lot of, if not all of the finale. It's been a couple of months since I watched the finale of the first season, but then it also features the first 2 episodes of the brand new season that will start streaming in July. And you kind of feel that in the way that it's editing. Like, it feels like a weird complaint to have, but the editing in here is really rough. It's really choppy. But again, it feels like the equivalent of watching a television movie on DVD or Blu-ray. There are very notable moments within the film where it'll change from scene to scene, but you can say, oh, well, this is where a commercial break is going to go. It doesn't have this like seamless flow to it the way that I would have liked it to. And it really kind of kept taking me out of the picture, especially in some of the more emotional moments or the action-packed moments. And so I think it'll flow better as a television where it's kind of its natural environment, but it did take me out of it a little bit watching this in a cinematic format. The animation here is beautiful. Like, it is just absolutely vibrant and illuminating and breathtaking. The color palettes here are really something to consider, because not only do you have muted colors for the first, I would probably say, third of the film. Once the big bad kind of gets introduced, he brings with him just a bunch of really vibrant colors, and it's very heavy on purples and blues and reds, and this movie just looks gorgeous regardless of where the tone is or regardless of where it is in the story. It is just one of the most visually satisfying animes that is being aired today. Now, I did talk about how this film does take a darker turn to this, and with that said, a lot of the signature humor that was in the first season with these characters largely doesn't exist here. Now, I did touch on this earlier, but Evil Eye does feel like a much more take on this world and these characters. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but if you're like me and really fell in love with the signature humor and kind of almost perverted nature of the first season, then this one might sadly kind of disappoint you a little bit. Now, that's not to say that the episode that humor won't return with the season when it returns in July and kind of flesh out. But this definitely feels cinematic. These stories definitely feel like they're engrossing, but it's just in a much more mature way. And for me, I just really wasn't prepared for that. I did not expect the type of tone this movie was going to have, especially with an anime like Dan to Dan, which is kind of a little bit more on the lighter, kind of goofier side. Even, I would even dare say, kind of juvenile humor at times. But I really did overall like it. It was really surprising to me, and I'm kind of curious to see what they're going to do moving forward. One of the main complaints I had about the first season was the fact of this character Gigi, who they introduced super late into the series. Again, I'm not super familiar with these characters or with the manga, so I don't know if that is like a thing of the manga and they're just anticipating it. But I really did like the way that this film really does kind of flesh him out and kind of almost in an essence kind of make him the star of it. I thought that was a nice touch and really warmed my heart to kind of get to know him better. He was one of the better parts in the movie for me. All right, I am ready to run this one through the Rorschach rating scale. I'm going to go ahead and give Dan to Dan, The Evil Eye, a 4 out of 5. Overall, I loved the mature progression of this world and these characters. It did take me by complete surprise to just know how serious and how dark this movie actually could be. Again, this is a trigger warning for anyone planning to watch this movie, that it does deal very heavily with suicide, but it does have really vibrant colors. The color palette and the animation just looks breathtaking at the end of the day. Dan to Dan, The Evil Eye is now playing in theaters everywhere from G Kids. Find the links in the show notes below to check your local listings. But let's talk about mental health. If you guys are new to our content, Mental Health Moment is where we take a theme of mental health out of the film which we're reviewing, talk about it for a few moments. As I've mentioned a few times throughout the course of this video already, this movie does deal really heavily with suicide, both from a visual standpoint as well as the effects that you now feel as a suicide loss survivor. There is a point in the story where we do see kind of spirits essentially coercing characters on screen to essentially lead them to their deaths, to die by suicide intently. And I honestly couldn't think of a better metaphor than what it feels like sometimes to have travel that road that starts with depression, ultimately ends up leading down things like suicide, self-mutilation, alcoholism, drug addiction, self-hatred, things like that, etc. For context, I am speaking as someone that has not only thought about suicide multiple times in their lives, but is also a suicide loss survivor and has been around several friends that have unfortunately also become suicide loss survivors. Suicide is currently the 11th leading cause of death in the United States as of 2023, our most recent statistics. On top of that, it also tells us that there are over 12 million people that had considered suicide in 2023. There were over 3 million people that had made a plan for suicide, and there were over 1.6 million people that had actually attempted to die by suicide. These numbers teach us not only how real suicide is and how much we need to start talking about them, but it also reminds us that if you or someone you know are going through this or considering this or have ever thought about this, that you are not alone. This is more common than I think most people care to admit or even realize. So if you or someone you know is struggling with suicide, please consider our mental health resource library. The link is going to be in the show notes below. Dan to Dan, The Evil Eye is now playing in theaters everywhere from G Kids. It's in the show notes below. You guys will find links to check it out, where to catch it out at your local listings, as well as our mental health resource library, along with our social media, how to support us financially via Patreon and Paramount Plus and or as well as more movie reviews like this, links to our podcast network, and that follow button. So until next time, remember to keep it classy, keep it spooky. Have a good night.